Coming on the heels of celebrating Nigeria's 20 years of unbroken democracy, the European Union Election Observation Mission has released its final report on the just concluded 2019 general elections on Saturday in Abuja. At a press conference, the chief observer, Maria Arena, presented the final report to journalists, stating that the final report contains 30 recommendations for Nigerian government's consideration for future elections. 7 out of the 30 recommendations were prioritized. Reina pointed out that the EU-EOM seeks to deepen democracy, while also commending the INEC for implementing the recommendation in 2015. There are, however, hope for better future elections in Nigeria following their recommendations.
Very much for attending today's press conference, at which the EU Election Observation Mission will present its final report for these 19 general elections. Our report brings together the findings and analysis of our observations over the 3 months the mission was in Nigeria from the 5th of January to the 7th of April. It also includes the 30 recommendations for electoral reforms. Such changes are critical for improved future elections. The conclusions and recommendations in our report are based on international commitments for democratic election that Nigeria has signed up to. We looked at what happened in practice and on these elections and have identified where laws and practices can be strengthened. Ladies and gentlemen, before I turn to the content of our report and the recommendation of it, may I quickly recap on the size and duration of our mission and how an EU election observation mission assesses an electoral process. The first thing, of course, to say is that EU deployed an election observation mission after an invitation coming from INEC. The mission was in Nigeria for a total of 13 weeks. We had a core team of 11 experts and 40 long-term observers deployed in 20 locations around the country, who went to every state in the country. In total, we had 91 observers for the presidential and National Assembly elections, 73 for the governorship and the state House of Assembly election, and 20 for the supplementary governorship election held on the 23rd of March. Our mandate was to conduct an independent and objective assessment of the electoral process in accordance with the law of Nigeria and, as I said earlier, with the international and regional commitments that which Nigeria is a signatory. Now I will give a headline summary of our. We can say positively that we note that the elections were competitive and parties were able to campaign with freedom of assembly, expression and movement largely respected in the country. The very effective role played by civil society organizations in promoting election reforms and contributing to accountability of the process was very important and need to continue. However, overall, the 19 elections showed that the need for fundamental electoral reform so that future elections better serve the interests of all Nigerians. As we already noted in our preliminary statements earlier in the year, the elections were marked by severe operational and transparency shortcomings, electoral security problems, and low turnout. Unfortunately, leading parties were at fault in not reining in acts of violence and intimidation by their supporters, and in abusing incumbency at federal and state level. Except for federal radio, our media monitoring found that state media primarily serves the interest of the president or the governor at state level. Journalists were subject to harassment, and scrutiny of the electoral process was at times compromised, with some independent observers being obstructed in their work, including by security agencies. So, ladies and gentlemen, there is an urgent need to improve the electoral process and to restore faith in the system. Without this, there is a risk of uncountable leadership in the country and citizen disengagement. Such electoral reform needs political leadership that is dedicated to the rights of Nigerian citizens and an inclusive process of national dialogue involving state institutions, political parties, civil society, and of course the media. This needs to be urgently undertaken to allow time for debates, legislative changes, and implementation well in advance of the next election of 2023. Our report, as I said, makes 30 recommendations for consideration. They are listed in a table at the back of the report, as well as in the main body of the report. They cover all aspects of electoral process, including the legal framework for elections, the conduct of electoral administration, voter registration, the election campaign, electoral security, media, electoral dispute resolution, and the participation of women and vulnerable groups in the system. I'd like to focus on our 7 priority recommendations. First of them, with respect to INEC. Although INEC worked in difficult circumstances and made some improvements, such as simplifying voting procedures, a number of operational and procedural weaknesses identified by previous EU election observation missions were not addressed for the 2019 elections, in particular with regard to check and transparency in the result process. For example, the guidelines and manual for polling officials didn't include sufficient provision for dealing with anomalies and questionable polling unit results during the collation. And INEC didn't centrally publish results with a breakdown by polling unit after the election, which meant it was very difficult for parties, candidates, and voters to independently cross-check results. The EU-EOM, therefore, recommend a strengthening of INEC procedures for the collation of results in order to improve integrity and confidence in the process. Second, and also in relation to the result process, we recommend that requirements are established for full results transparency, with data made easily accessible to the public. All results, including those from lower levels, could be displayed at collation centers. In addition, results from all collation centers could be scanned and published on INEC website by the time of the declaration of the final results. Third, we recommend a strengthening of the organizational and operational capacity of INEC. The postponement of the election clearly shows how important it is to improve planning for timely and accountable election preparations. Our fourth priority recommendation is in relation with electoral security. The 19th election became increasingly marred by violence, fatalities, and intimidation of voters and INEC officials. mainly by party supporters. INEC reported attacks on its staff and officers and stated that some soldiers and armed gangs invaded collation centers in rivers during the state elections. During the 20 March supplementary election, extensive electoral security problems were observed by our mission in some areas, with groups of men with weapons intimidating and obstructing the process, and security agencies ineffective at protecting citizens' rights to vote. The Interagency Consultative Committee on Election Security, chaired by INEC, included all of the responsibility security agency. It was not sufficiently effective. It didn't involve stakeholders, nor did it provide necessary information. We recommend that in the future it works more transparently and inclusively by holding regular consultation with political parties and civil society. We suggest also that security arrangements, as well as rules of engagement, updates and complaints mechanisms are all made public for more transparency. There needs to be a clear delineation of the operational role of different security agencies, with the military only involved in electoral security at the request of INEC. Our fifth priority recommendation concerns electoral dispute resolution mechanisms. These were used extensively during the electoral process, but there were overlapping jurisdictions and conflicting and late rulings. All of these created uncertainty in the electoral process. Therefore, to promote access to remedy and to avoid petitions being taken to different courts at the same time, we suggest that electoral tribunals are extended to cover pre-election cases. We also recommend more judges are appointed to increase judicial capacity. There is also a need for more training on election-related matters and improved case management mechanism. The sixth recommendation, priority in the recommendation, Nigeria has the lowest rate of women in parliament in Africa. And disappointingly, these elections resulted in another fall in the number of women elected in the country. As there are no legal provisions for independent candidacy, women are dependent on political parties for nomination. Yet parties continue to lack policies and practices to promote women in party leaderships or candidates. We therefore recommend to introduce a legal requirement for political parties to have a minimum representation of women among candidates, and that non-compliance with this requirement be sanctioned with proportional penalties. 7, and finally, a recommendation with regard to media. One of the obstacles to media freedom in Nigeria is the costly and cumbersome licensing requirements for broadcast media, which deter independent broadcasting and encourages coverage that favors the president and incumbent governors. We recommend reform of the licensing system for broadcast media so as to provide for pluralism and diversity in all states. We suggest media ownership structure are publicized. Powers to grant license are vested in the National Broadcasting Commission without presidential approval, and that license fees be tailored to the economic circumstances in each state. I would like to stress that these 7 priorities, recommendations, as well as the others, are not produced out of thin air. We do not draw them in isolation. On the contrary, consultation is at the heart of the process, To this end, we held many meetings to discuss our recommendation, including with INEC, political parties, civil society organizations, media, as well as other electoral stakeholders. Further, over the course of the next few days, the EU Election Observation Mission will meet again with INEC and also participate in the Roundtable Conference co-organized by the Kofi Annan Foundation and the Situation Room. This roundtable will be a great opportunity for key domestic and international electoral stakeholders to come together to discuss ways in which the electoral reform process can be moved forward, including, of course, the EU recommendations. Ladies and gentlemen, the systemic problem evident in the 2019 electoral process show the need for an inclusive national discussion on reform for greater electoral integrity and participation. This is not a novel idea. The suggestion of a national conversation or dialogue is one that comes from the INEC itself, as well as many others of this recommendation. It is one that European Union strongly supports. As an election observation mission, our work finishes with the publication of this report. It is now the EU delegation, and we have the honor to have the ambassador with us today, to stand ready to support Nigeria in the implementation of the recommendation put forward for consideration. Some of these recommendations are quite ambitious, but we strongly believe that if implemented, they would meaningfully contribute to Nigeria's democratic development. We have seen Nigeria make improvements to elections in the past and think that fundamental reform is needed again. Such improvements are for the benefit of the Nigerian people and also for Nigeria to show the world its commitment to democratic elections. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening, and thank you again to the Nigerian authorities and Nigerian people for your warm welcome. And we are ready, Anna and I, to answer your question. Thank you very much.
In case you didn't know, following an invitation from INEC, EOM was present in Nigeria between 5th of January and 7th of April 2019, observing the presidential and National Assembly elections on 23rd February, the governorship and State House of Assembly elections on the 9th of March. The mission's 40 long-term observers went to all 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory with a mandate to observe all aspects of the electoral process and assess the extent to which the elections complied with Nigeria's international and regional commitments for elections, as well as national legislation. The European Union Election Observation Mission considered priority the strengthening of INEC procedures for the collation of results to improve integrity and confidence in electoral outcomes in future elections in Nigeria. Toyin Ajolori, reporting for On Duty TV, Abuja, Nigeria.